going to head straight over to Alberta, where the provincial government has tabled legislation that will regulate gender-affirming care, sex education, pronouns, and trans women and girls' participation in sports. The Premier, Danielle Smith, first signaled the legislation was coming earlier this year, and it has garnered lots of headlines ever since. Here's a breakdown of some of what the legislation will do. Prohibit, for example, regulated health professionals from performing sex reassignment surgeries on minors. Prohibit hormone therapies for teenagers aged 15 and under. Notify parents for students 17 and under who request new pronoun or gender-preferred names, plus require consent for those 15 and under, and require organizations to establish athlete eligibility policies. And Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith is with me live now. Hi, Premier. Good to see you as always. Thanks for making the time.
Hi, Vassy.
I wanted to start off on the timing of this and more bluntly, why this is a priority for you right now. Albertans, for example, are still waiting on the tax break that you promised in the election. If lower oil prices hold, your surplus will evaporate into a deficit. More than 500,000 Albertans don't have a family doctor. The number of people in Edmonton experiencing homelessness, we just found out yesterday, has jumped by 2,000 in the last year to sit at 5,000. Are you doing this now to bolster your support in your party's leadership review this weekend?
Well, look, we are focused on all of those issues. We've got a budget that will be coming through in February where we hope we'll be able to accelerate the tax cut. We've been refocusing the healthcare system so that one of our priorities could be met, that every person has a family doctor or a nurse practitioner. And we've set up navigation centers in both Calgary and Edmonton to begin getting services to those who are on the streets. So we can do a lot of things all at once. We're a very active government. And this is a priority that has been identified by parents. We've identified problems as well internationally with new evidence coming forward, like the Cass report in the UK. And we felt that it was time to put some guidelines around these issues.
Again, though, I'm unclear as to why the need for it. I take your point on other reports in other places that have been conducted, but there's only, I think the population in Alberta, from what I read in the last Stats Can, of trans people was just 0.37% of the population. The government can only have so many priorities, can only generate so many outcomes. Why, again, would you choose this? How are Albertans to assume anything other than you would like to curry favor with certain aspects of your base?
Well, I think families and parents want to know what's going on with their kids. That's kind of where it began. We have a lot of parents who got in touch with us, concerned about what was being taught in schools. And so one of the aspects that we're doing is making sure that parents have an opt-in on sexual orientation, sexuality, and gender ideology classes so that they can either opt their kids into it or at least be able to have a conversation with them when they come home. We also know that the beginning of transition happens with social transition. And we think it's important that if there's a formal name change or a formal pronoun change, that parents aren't the last to know. Parents also need to be included in that decision so that they can help and support their child every step of the way. In addition, we know that these are really complex issues with kids. We want to make sure that they've got appropriate mental health support, counseling support, so that they don't make a decision prematurely that might impact their fertility or impact their personal health for the rest of their lives. So we want to make sure that kids are making these decisions when they're mature enough to be able to make them.
You said at the beginning that you're basing it on what a lot of parents have told you. How many parents?
Oh, I don't know, hundreds, thousands. We hear about it all the time.
Well, there's a difference.
Fair enough. I mean, there's enough concern out there that we have heard about it in town halls. We hear about it in letters that come into our offices. We hear about it in the meetings that we have. And so this is the reason why we knew that we needed to act on it. When you have decisions that are being made that could affect a child's health, we believe that they need to make those as adults. And that's part of the reason for why we're moving ahead on this.
Just to respectfully challenge the decisions and the scope of them, according to information from your own government, there were only 8 gender-affirming top surgeries for youth in Alberta between January 22 and February 2023. There were nearly 2,700 total claims for non-surgical interventions over the same period, but your government could not clarify exactly how many of those treatments were for things other than gender dysphoria. And actually, the only thing you could clarify, your government could clarify, was that the majority of them represented stuff that was not gender dysphoria. So what, again, I'll put to you, like, what is the need that you are actually addressing here if the people that you are protecting are so few in number?
Well, I can tell you, Kelly was one of the individuals who came to us today, and she spoke with us, and she's an individual who transitioned to male as an adult. realized that it was not the right decision for her and transitioned back. And she's now created a detransitioning organization to help others do so. And she said, you know, if I was unclear and uncertain at age 37, how's a 10-year-old supposed to know this? Kids need to be able to get the mental health support and also the appropriate medical support, family support, before they make some of these incredibly life-altering decisions. I mean, our main purpose is to make sure that kids aren't making decisions that will prematurely prevent them from being able to have kids of their own one day. There's certain decisions that you make as an adult. We put all kinds of restrictions on children until their brain is developed to a point where they understand the consequences of their decisions. And these are adult decisions. And so we're going to make sure that kids have the opportunity to make them when they're older.
And do you have evidence that beyond that one example you've provided, any of those 8 surgeries, for example, that took place in the last year did not include any kind of guidance or counseling or mental health help, or that their parents were against it? Again, a question of what evidence you're basing these decisions on.
Well, if you look at the Cass report, she went through and gave Dr. Hilary Cass and gave the most comprehensive 4-year study of all of the evidence that's out there. And quite frankly, where the evidence is lacking is on the long-term consequences of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and what happens with kids when they transition. How many of them remain happy with that decision well into adulthood? How many of them detransition? These are all things that we need to know. We shouldn't be experimenting on children. And so we want to make sure that we have good counseling with appropriate doctor support, appropriate parental support, and that kids are old enough and mature enough to be able to make and understand the decisions that they're making. So we're putting some guidelines around it, and we think we found the right balance.
In the absence of that information, and I should say it was done in the UK, it studied stuff that had happened in the UK, not that had happened in Alberta. In the absence of that information, why are you limiting rights? I get it if you had that information and you had evidence that everything you're afraid might happen is happening. Then I understand limiting rights. But you're limiting rights right now based on stuff that isn't even a fact.
Well, we have had top surgery performed on children under the age of 17. That's why we're saying that can't happen anymore. You're not going to be able to have surgery until you're an adult, 18 years of age and older. We have 2,900 kids who are on hormone therapy for one reason or another, and we frankly need to have more information about what that is all about. That's part of what we're going through to make sure that we understand which kids are getting what treatment. And whether or not it is at an age that is appropriate for them so that it doesn't have long-term consequences. The fact of the matter is there hasn't been very good long-term surveys on what has happened, what the consequences are of being on these very powerful drugs at a very young age. And we think that work needs to be done.
And I think that the point you make is fair. If, for example, you find of those 2,900 people that 2,800 of them are on these things for gender dysphoria and that the long-term impact conclusively is detrimental to them, then enacting a policy to address that may or may not limit rights makes sense. But you don't have any of that information. You don't even know as a government how many of those 2,900 people got that treatment for gender dysphoria, and yet you're making a policy based on what? A fear?
Well, but that's not normally how medical science works. We don't conduct experiments and then when it causes enough harm, change it afterwards. It's actually in medical science, you're supposed to do the examination beforehand, have good clinical research before you start making these kinds of experiments with young people. So I would say that the Cass report was quite shocking in demonstrating that there hasn't been the due diligence. And so we want to make sure that we are being very thoughtful about this, and that we're not making decisions that allow kids to make these decisions prematurely before they know the consequences. The consequences are serious. If you don't go through puberty, you can't have children. And that is something that we believe you have to be able to be old enough to even understand what that means before you make a decision like that.
I know your time is very limited, so I just have time for one more question. Are you prepared to invoke the notwithstanding clause to make this become law?
Well, as you know, the Charter allows for politicians and governments to make decisions that are reasonable and demonstrable in a free and democratic society. That's one of the parameters of the Charter. We think that we've been reasonable here. We think we have demonstrated that we are trying to find that balance. And we have all kinds of circumstances where we tell children, you got to wait until you're older. And this is one of those ones. And I think that it will stand up.
Respectfully, that's not an answer. If it's determined that you didn't strike that reasonableness, are you prepared to circumvent the Charter with the notwithstanding clause?
I think we should wait and see how it plays out. As I say, we are very mindful that it's appropriate to find a right balance. And we think that we've done that. And if it ends up being something that's adjudicated in the court, I think we'll demonstrate that we have been reasonable and we have been mindful of that. We want to just make sure that we're doing what's best for kids.
Okay, Premier, I'll leave it on that note. I appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much.